The biggest lie you were ever told is that goodness is a virtue. It is, in fact, the most reliable guarantee of your own destruction. We confuse moral purity with functional strength, and that confusion is the most common reason decent people are crushed by the indifferent mechanism of the world. For generations, we have been sold the myth of the nice guy, the passive, well-meaning, emotionally available man or woman who believes that sincerity is a substitute for leverage. This person is not a moral agent. They are a walking liability, a vessel waiting for the truly cynical to empty its contents. Naivety is not innocence. It is a spiritual debt that the universe will collect with brutal efficiency. The system is rigged against the purely good because pure goodness lacks teeth, lacks foresight, and utterly fails to grasp the necessity of strategic depth. It operates under the tyrannical assumption of reciprocity, the childish hope that because you are fair, others must be fair in return. The result is chronic victimization, burnout, and a deep-seated bitterness that eventually turns the good person toxic from the inside out. They become disillusioned, not because the world is evil, but because they tried to fight a war they refused to prepare for, armed only with a philosophy of passive consent. This essay is not a defense of evil. It is a declaration of necessary maturity. It is time to retire the naive nice guy and usher in the only model of character that allows morality to survive contact with reality: the Machiavellian nice guy. This figure is the antidote to modern psychological softness, the necessary evolution of kindness into a weaponized competence. The thesis is simple and absolute. The only durable form of morality in a broken world is Machiavellian morality. A goodness armed with cynicism, guided by strategy, and defended by a profound understanding of human leverage. If you are tired of shallow answers, if you are weary of the empty reassurance that simply being a good person is enough, and if you are ready to dismantle the comforting lies you were raised on to finally understand the cold mechanics of power and effective decency, then take a second and subscribe now. Do not miss the rest of this analysis. We are only just scratching the surface of what it means to be truly effective. To understand this required shift, we must first accept the cold, hard truth of power. Power is not inherently corrupt. It is the currency of influence. To refuse power is not to be pure. It is merely to abdicate responsibility and guarantee that those who hold less savory intentions will dictate the terms of your life and the lives of those you care for. The Machiavellian nice guy does not chase power for vanity, but integrates it for autonomy. He recognizes that true compassion cannot afford to be weak. Weakness is an open invitation to predators, and the person who chooses weakness is ultimately choosing complicity in their own demise. The naive nice guy mistakes his own powerlessness for virtue, clinging to the comforting idea that he is better than those who manipulate, while constantly finding himself on the receiving end of that manipulation. The MNG, by contrast, operates with strategic empathy. He does not treat people as they should be, but as they are. He maps the emotional landscape and the underlying incentives, recognizing that most human action is driven by self-interest, ego preservation, and fear, even the actions that appear altruistic. This is not a judgment, it is reconnaissance. He understands the shadow side of himself and others, integrating the psychological darkness required for effective navigation. He knows the difference between being liked and being respected. Being liked is cheap, transactional, and momentary. Being respected requires boundaries, foresight, and the credible, implicit threat that those boundaries will be defended. The naive nice guy desperately seeks validation. The Machiavellian nice guy seeks influence. The former is dependent. The latter is free. This strategic mindset is the core of the antidote. It allows the individual to practice selective altruism, conserving their precious resources, time, energy, emotional capital, for those who are worthy of it, those who appreciate it, and those who have proven they operate with a reciprocal code. The purely good person burns their resources indiscriminately, casting pearls before swine, only to be surprised when they are trampled underfoot. The Machiavellian nice guy understands that scarcity creates value, and his goodness must therefore be a controlled, intentional output, not an uncontrolled, obligatory leak. He uses psychological tools, not to harm, but to protect his equilibrium, to establish robust deterrence, and to ensure that his fundamental kindness can be delivered from a position of impregnable strength. He is the quiet force in the room who rarely needs to raise his voice, because everyone intuitively knows the depth of his competence. He is the guardian of his own peace, understanding that his moral obligations begin and end with his effectiveness. He is the guardian of his own peace, understanding that his moral obligations begin and end with his effectiveness. But why do so many suffer the fate of the naive nice guy? Why this deep, self-destructive compulsion to overextend, to apologize for their existence, and to confuse compliance with virtue? The answer lies in a psychological covenant made long ago, typically in childhood, where approval was conditional upon subordination. The naive nice guy believes in the tyranny of the internal ledger. He meticulously tracks every act of kindness, every sacrifice, every painful concession, because he believes the universe, or at least the people within it, are supposed to pay him back in validation, safety, and affection. He is operating under a broken economic model, convinced that goodness is a form of currency, when in reality, in the cold marketplace of human interaction, goodness is often simply overhead. This leads to the festering illness of resentment, the poison the NNG drinks daily, hoping others will die. When the anticipated payment never arrives, when his vulnerability is met not with reciprocation but with exploitation, he doesn't question the contract. He questions his own worthiness. He doubles down on niceness, mistakenly believing that if only he is more accommodating, more subservient, the universe will finally correct itself. This reliance on the broken social contract is just the surface layer. Deeper down lies the absolute refusal to integrate the shadow. The MNG knows he has the capacity for strategic cruelty, for cold calculation, and for decisive aggression. And because he knows it, he controls it. The NNG, however, treats these darker psychological capacities as external demons to be perpetually suppressed. He is terrified of his own anger, terrified of his own self-interest, because he has been conditioned to believe that acknowledging power makes him a bad person. This refusal to own his inherent psychological power, the power to say no, the power to create consequences, the power to demand respect, is precisely why he becomes a victim. He sacrifices the truth of his experience for the illusion of purity. If this kind of unforgiving psychological autopsy resonates with the painful, unacknowledged dynamics in your own life, you need to understand the mechanisms of power far better than you do now. Do not let the algorithms bury the uncomfortable truth. Take 2 seconds to subscribe right now so you don't miss the next critical part of the conversation. The tragedy of the NNG is that he mistakes effectiveness for evil. He sees the capacity to manipulate, to exert influence, or to deploy strategic detachment, and immediately classifies it as immoral, thereby removing those necessary tools from his own defensive arsenal. This leaves him perpetually reactive, navigating the world not as an autonomous actor, but as a perpetual supplicant, asking permission for his own existence. He confuses the absence of conflict with genuine peace. Genuine peace, the kind the MNG enjoys, is built not on the hope that bad actors won't exist, but on the certainty that when they appear, they will be met with a response so effective it renders future incursions unthinkable. This is the definition of deterrence, and deterrence is the ultimate act of self-preservation. When the NNG finally reaches his breaking point, his resentment does not manifest as controlled strategy, but as explosive, ineffective rage, confirming his worst fear, that he is, fundamentally, a bad person. He becomes the very thing he desperately tried not to be, but without the competence necessary to utilize that darkness constructively. The MNG, having integrated his shadow, understands that the most ethical position is the one maintained from overwhelming strength. His kindness is not a request for validation. It is a gift delivered from abundance. He possesses the capacity for absolute emotional detachment when necessary, a skill the NNG interprets as coldness, but which the MNG knows is the only way to make clear-headed, high-stakes decisions. He practices what could be called calibrated generosity. The act is performed not for the expectation of a specific return, but as an investment in a robust, functional social ecology where competence and integrity are mutually reinforced. When he gives fully. But he reserves the right to withdraw his presence, resources, and attention instantly and permanently the moment the recipient demonstrates a lack of respect or a parasitic motive. This withdrawal is executed without drama, guilt, or explanation. It is simply the closure of an account that failed to yield the promised return. This strategic detachment is what separates the martyr from the leader. The martyr sacrifices himself to prove his virtue. The leader preserves himself to sustain his mission. If you find value in these relentless psychological dissections, if this depth of analysis is challenging your comfortable illusions about morality and power, then prove that this kind of content is worth creating by hitting the subscribe button and staying engaged. We need to normalize the hard, necessary truths. The Machiavellian nice guy ultimately understands that being fundamentally good means being powerfully effective. If you are unable to protect yourself, your goodness is a vulnerability that will be exploited, leaving you bitter and broken. If you are unable to protect those you love, your proclaimed morality is merely abstract cowardice. The true test of character is not what you do when the cost is zero, but the quality of your decisions when the stakes are existential. The Machiavellian nice guy makes the only truly ethical choice available. He chooses strength first, because only strength can sustainably underwrite virtue. Therefore, the final verdict is uncompromising. Niceness without power is not virtue. It is surrender. The only path to sustainable kindness is through the cultivation of impregnable, self-aware competence. If you are ready to join the small but growing community committed to integrating this necessary darkness for the sake of true, robust integrity, subscribe now and join us. The ethical catastrophe is always rooted in the gap between good intentions and actual capability. Incompetence, when coupled with boundless goodwill, is not merely frustrating. It is the most insidious form of cruelty. The well-meaning, passive idealist creates an ethical debt, a promise of protection or provision that their lack of strategic depth or executive power ensures they can never repay. They become the unwitting accomplice to the predators they sought to oppose, because their weakness creates the perfect vacuum for true malice to thrive. This is why the Machiavellian nice guy views wasted energy, wasted resources, and wasted time as moral failings. If you genuinely want to alleviate suffering, then your primary obligation is efficiency. Your mission must be protected from bureaucratic drift, emotional manipulation, and the slow, corrosive entropy of the mediocre mind. Anything less is self-indulgence masquerading as compassion. To witness this principle in action, look not to the grand narratives of history, but to the microecologies of failed organizations or broken families. Consider the figure of the universally beloved, passively moral CEO who refuses to fire the underperforming, yet charming, 30-year veteran. The CEO's intention is kindness, to spare the veteran the pain of termination. But the result is devastating. The veteran's continued incompetence cripples the team, forcing the competent and ethical employees to carry double the load, leading to burnout, resentment, and the eventual exodus of the truly valuable talent. The CEO's soft-hearted inaction did not preserve one job. It destroyed 20 others, eroded the culture, and risked the solvency of the entire organization, potentially costing hundreds of livelihoods. Whose morality is superior? The leader who, with a heavy heart and surgical precision, cuts the non-functioning limb to save the body? Or the leader who sacrifices the entire organism for the sentimental preservation of a single, non-contributing element? The Machiavellian nice guy knows the answer is obvious, yet tragically avoided by most. The most compassionate act available to the competent leader is the swift, clean, and permanent removal of everything that actively detracts from the collective goal. If this unflinching analysis, the willingness to apply cold logic to warm, sticky moral problems, is essential viewing for you, and if you believe that confronting these difficult truths is the only way forward, then take a moment to subscribe. We are building a space where intellectual courage is the baseline expectation, not the exception. This perspective shifts the entire axis of what it means to be responsible. Your responsibility is not just to your immediate feelings or your public image. It is to the outcome you claim to desire. If you desire order, you must tolerate the brief unpleasantness of setting strict boundaries. If you desire growth, you must enforce the painful standards of excellence. If you desire peace, you must first possess the capacity for overwhelming, decisive force, which, paradoxically, makes the use of that force unnecessary. The goal is not simply to be gentle, but to be the unwavering anchor of functional reality. This requires a level of emotional discipline that the purely self-sacrificing person simply cannot maintain. The martyr, driven by external validation, will eventually shatter under the weight of his own unsustainable giving. The Machiavellian nice guy, however, operates from a place of deep, internalized self-respect, understanding that his reservoir of resources, whether emotional, financial, or strategic, must be preserved at all costs, because that reservoir is the source of his sustainable ability to help others. He must say no 100 times to maintain the power to say yes once, meaningfully, effectively, and without resentment. He refuses to be a perpetually leaking vessel because he recognizes that the highest moral calling is stewardship, the rigorous, unsentimental management of self for the benefit of all he chooses to protect. This stewardship means accepting that the highest form of kindness often looks indistinguishable from ruthlessness, particularly to those who benefit from the chaos of low standards. This stewardship means accepting that the highest form of kindness often looks indistinguishable from ruthlessness, particularly to those who benefit from the chaos of low standards. The greatest societal deception we have normalized is the lie of sincerity. We are told, incessantly, that good intentions absolve incompetence. This is the soft, comforting morality of children. "I meant well," they whine, as the vase shatters, their own emotional discomfort mitigated by the visibility of their effort. But in the cold equations of adult reality, meaning well is a neutral variable. It provides zero net benefit to the person you failed to help and zero protection against the negative consequences of your sloppy execution. We have created a perverse culture where people are praised for their visible, exhausted effort, the desperate, self-flagellating labor of the ineffective, rather than the quiet, strategic competence of the person who manages resources so perfectly that he appears to have exerted no effort at all. We worship the dramatic, self-immolating fire of the martyr who burns out spectacularly, leaving behind a trail of emotional wreckage and half-finished projects, while condemning the cool efficiency of the planner who calculated the cost and risk and decided to allocate his resources elsewhere, perhaps saving them for the moment they truly matter. This is not morality. It is aesthetic preference masquerading as virtue, a cheap trick designed to make the mediocre feel morally superior to the effective. The true ethical imperative is not simply trying to do good. It is demonstrably, verifiably achieving good. And achievement requires a brutal honesty about one's own limitations and the necessity of applying leverage, strategy, and strategic detachment, not brute, well-intentioned force. The Machiavellian nice guy understands that failure stemming from good intentions is still failure, and perhaps even worse, because it cloaks ineptitude in a protective layer of moral superiority. He views incompetence not merely as a character flaw, but as a moral hazard, a form of intellectual laziness that consumes scarce resources. If you are going to commit the precious, finite resource of your own life, time, money, emotional energy, to a noble cause, you have an ethical obligation to maximize your effectiveness. Anything less is wasteful, irresponsible, and ultimately selfish. It is selfish because it prioritizes the feeling of being good, the cheap high of visible intent, over the responsibility of doing good, the difficult delivery of measurable impact. This shift from the morality of feeling to the morality of outcome fundamentally changes how we view every transaction, demanding rigor where society demands leniency, and demanding strategy where society demands only heart. If you find this level of unsentimental analysis challenging, but profoundly necessary, if you recognize the vast difference between the comforting lie society feeds you and the uncomfortable truth that actually unlocks power, then I urge you to consider subscribing right now. We only deal in the deep, dangerous mechanics of human behavior and effectiveness, not the surface-level affirmations that keep everyone comfortably mediocre. This intellectual rigor is precisely what allows the strategically kind person to succeed where the purely altruistic one collapses. The MNG views his own emotional resilience as a tool, not a fragile ecosystem to be perpetually defended. He knows that external expectations are simply noise, and that the only metric that matters is his own internal standard of utility. He can absorb the necessary hatred and the accusations of coldness that inevitably follow the setting of high standards, because he is insulated by the knowledge that he is performing his function effectively. He doesn't need public forgiveness for his boundaries. He needs private discipline to maintain them. And this distinction, the reliance on internal validation derived from functional effectiveness rather than external validation derived from performative martyrdom, is the secret engine of true, sustainable influence. This distinction, the reliance on internal validation derived from functional effectiveness rather than external validation derived from performative martyrdom, is the secret engine of true, sustainable influence. The fundamental psychological suffering of the modern, well-meaning person is rooted in their refusal to accept that social harmony and true effectiveness are often mutually exclusive goals. They are trapped in a zero-sum conflict between their own finite capacity and the infinite, entitled expectations projected onto them by a society that prizes appearance over impact. This conflict is devastating because it teaches the individual that friction is failure. We are conditioned from childhood to believe that the morally successful life is one defined by the smoothness of its social interactions, the absence of uncomfortable refusals, and the ready availability of the self for anyone who demands it. The MNG understands this conditioning is a psychological death trap. The true failure is not the friction caused by setting a necessary boundary, but the structural collapse that results from failing to set it. The well-meaning individual constantly chases the immediate emotional payoff, the dopamine hit of being perceived as helpful, compassionate, or selfless. This is the virtue carbohydrate: instant energy, instant praise, and a profound crash that follows inevitably. They confuse exhaustion for achievement, believing that if they are sufficiently depleted, they must have contributed sufficient value. Their identity becomes inextricably linked to their state of depletion, a profound, masochistic identification with the role of the martyr. They are addicted to the very system that burns them out, seeking ever more external praise to fill the void created by their constant violation of their own internal mandate. This is why the common person suffers, not because the world is too demanding, but because they have outsourced the definition of their own success to the very voices that will consume them whole. They have traded functional power for emotional comfort, and the price they pay is chronic inauthenticity. If you find this level of diagnosis compelling, if you recognize that your own exhaustion is often a symptom of misaligned incentives, not a badge of honor, then you understand the necessity of this ruthless, analytical approach. Supporting this channel means supporting the kind of deep, dangerous thinking required to break free from these debilitating psychological cycles, and I urge you to subscribe now. We are building an intellectual arsenal against the systems of superficiality that hold back genuinely effective people. The strategically kind individual knows that to truly deliver profound good, they must necessarily practice small, necessary cruelties. This is the terrifying realization that separates the amateur from the master. The necessary cruelty is the refusal to engage in a low-impact request that would compromise a high-impact goal. It is the cold, unsentimental assessment of resource allocation that demands they say no to a friend, a charity, or even a family member, not out of malice, but out of a higher ethical obligation to maximum utility. When the MNG refuses to loan money to a chronic, irresponsible spender, they are not being cold. They are refusing to enable a destructive pattern, saving their resources for an intervention that actually has a chance of succeeding, whether that be in their own life or in the life of someone genuinely trapped. The moral cowardice is the easy yes, the comfortable agreement that preserves immediate social standing while guaranteeing ultimate failure. The MNG is willing to absorb the temporary hatred that follows the necessary no, because they are playing an intertemporal game. They understand that their effectiveness tomorrow depends entirely on the disciplined boundaries they maintain today. This means recognizing that people often hate you not for your failures, but for your successful boundaries. They hate you because your refusal challenges their own dependency narrative and exposes the flimsiness of their own lack of rigor. This external resistance is not a sign of moral failure. It is proof of functional success. The moment you are universally loved is the moment you have stopped producing anything of value that challenges the status quo. The MNG's goal is not to be loved by the maximum number of people, but to provide maximum demonstrable utility to the world, recognizing that utility inevitably creates friction. The person trapped in the morality of feelings suffers constantly because they treat their emotional ecosystem as a democracy where every external voice gets a vote. The MNG treats their emotional ecosystem as a meritocracy run by a benevolent dictator, the self, where external inputs are analyzed for utility and nothing more. This commitment to internal governance transforms emotional resilience from a passive defense mechanism into an active, strategic resource, allowing them to remain a reliable source of power in a world defined by emotional volatility and moral compromise. The final verdict is this: if your kindness is not strategic, it is merely emotional leakage, and you are not a benefactor. You are merely a resource waiting to be depleted. True influence is impossible without the discipline to prioritize outcome over feeling, rigor over comfort, and the strategic no over the habitual, exhausting yes. To master this philosophy is to move from being an emotional victim of the world's demands to becoming the ruthless, focused architect of genuine, measurable good. If this essay has shifted your perception of what true effectiveness demands, and you are ready to join a community dedicated to building that necessary architecture of influence and rigor, then subscribe and join us now. The world does not need more well-meaning, emotionally brittle martyrs. It requires surgeons who can cut away the cancerous demands of others without remorse, ensuring the survival of the functional entity. The final verdict is this: the price of genuine influence is the strategic forfeiture of universal emotional approval. If you want to change the landscape, you must first master the geography of your own indifference to external noise, treating the world's opinions as data points, never as marching orders. The tragedy of modern ethics is the belief that moral worth is derived from the feeling of compassion, rather than the demonstrably difficult act of effective intervention. We are drowning in intentions and starving for outcomes. Therefore, the only viable path forward is to willingly accept the moral paradox. You must become exactly as cold as necessary to remain reliably warm to the few things that actually matter. You must build your life not as a porous net designed to catch every passing emotional stray, but as an impenetrable fortress designed to launch maximum utility. Stop trying to earn permission for your own strength. The true test of your philosophy is not what you feel when you read these words, but what you do when the world demands you sacrifice your rigor for its comfort. If you are one of the few who understands that to achieve extraordinary good, you must first cultivate extraordinary, ruthless self-governance, and you are ready to stand with those who are actively building this hard-won sovereignty, then subscribe right now and join the community dedicated to becoming the necessary architects of measurable, strategic influence. This is the ultimate test of character. Do you choose the soft, immediate validation of the crowd, or the hard, deferred victory secured by your own disciplined isolation? The final verdict, delivered without apology, is this: the most moral choice is always the one that maximizes utility, even if it feels cruel in the moment. Forget the sentimental fairy tales of collective self-help. The only genuine revolution begins and ends within the iron walls of your own self-control. Your life is not a democracy where every passing emotion or external demand deserves a vote. It is a dictatorship, and you are the necessary tyrant. Accept the glorious burden of being misunderstood, because the comfort of being universally approved is the silent epitaph of a life spent achieving nothing of consequence. The ultimate verdict is therefore not idealistic, but purely arithmetic. The emotional cost of your rigor is always preferable to the tangible disaster caused by your softness. The great lie we tell ourselves is that goodness must be gentle. It must not. Goodness is, by its very nature, sharp, precise, and often terrifyingly pragmatic. You are either a performer of morality, basking in the momentary glow of public approval while solving nothing, or you are an engineer of results, working in the shadows, accepting the necessary moral debt of efficiency. Stop seeking validation from the gallery. Turn your back to the noise. Your real task is not to manage their feelings, but to solve the problems they are too sentimental to confront. Let them call you heartless. Let them mistake your boundaries for cruelty. The true measure of your philosophy is the solidity of the ground you stand on, not the softness of the cushion you offer the world. The time for deliberation is over. The world does not need more philosophers of intent. It needs surgeons of outcome. It needs fewer martyrs and more architects. If you are willing to pick up the scalpel, if you are ready to trade fleeting comfort for enduring utility, and if you understand that the highest moral calling is the one that guarantees maximum strategic influence, if you are ready to join the small but growing collective dedicated to this ruthless pursuit of measurable truth, then subscribe now. Join the community. Start building the fortress. The verdict is clear. Sentimentality is sabotage. The softness of the world demands the absolute tyranny of your own internal rigor. Stop looking for acceptance. Start demanding competence. Your legacy will not be measured by how many people liked you, but by the weight of the structure you managed to build while they were still debating the blueprints. The choice is yours. Be the victim of the noise, or the architect of the silence. Join the community. Start building the fortress.